My dad was an anthropologist, and before I was born, he spent about 20 years on and off living with an indigenous tribe in the Peruvian Amazon. He stopped going after I was born because the region was taken over by a militant communist group called Sendero Luminoso. The things they did to the natives were unspeakable. Then one day, my dad gets an email from another anthropologist working in the region, telling him his old friend Matias says hi. Matias was the chief of the village and was my dad's chaperone when he was living there. They hadn't spoken in almost 30 years, and he had to be pushing 65 at this point, which is ancient for a native. When I heard this, I told him we had to go visit him. So we got the wheels turning and made our way down there. We flew into Lima, met up with this anthropologist, drove over the Andes and down into the Amazon basin. When we reached the end of the road, we took a boat down the river for about 2 days until we reached the settlement, and there we lived for about a month and a half. Matias was on his deathbed, and he died shortly after we left. His sons had taken over running the village. They had a celebration to welcome us, with music and dancing. Someone had caught a wild boar that morning, so we had fresh boar meat. They made this drink that was made from fermented yucca. It was terrible. Basically, they would boil yucca. Then the women would chew on it and spit it back into the pot, over and over again. The spit would cause it to ferment, and it basically tasted like spoiled, watered-down sour cream. It was nasty, but it was rude to refuse it if someone offered it to you. Of course, everywhere we went, people offered it to us, so I drank plenty of this rotten spit yogurt out of a dried gourd. We learned a lot about what happened to them during the years that Sendero Luminoso took over. It was awful. They murdered the natives for sport. They tortured them. They made children kill their parents. They made them eat each other. I've never heard anything like it, even in stories. To hear each person's personal account was heart-wrenching. The older generation who had lived through it were pretty much shell-shocked. They didn't dance or sing. They just sort of hung around. The younger generation, thankfully, had seemed to recover fully. While we were there, the anthropologist we came with wanted to get them a source of clean water from higher up in the mountains. The Amazon River was pretty polluted and full of trash from the towns upriver, so we trekked a day or so into the jungle to find a clean stream, and put the plan in place to get a pipe, basically, to run down into the village. I went net fishing under the full moon with some of the younger men. I set traps with some of the hunters. I helped carve up a boar they had just caught. I felled some trees to make room for new huts. I harvested some yucca and pineapple from a neighbor's plot. We made a ball out of some cloth, used an oar as a bat, and played baseball with the kids every day. I had brought a small travel guitar with me, and I taught the local kids to play a few chords. In turn, they taught me to shoot a bow and arrow. I was terrible at it. I remember a small girl of about 8 or 9 laughing at me as I tried to hit a tree. She took it from me, knocked the arrow, and hit the tree like a fucking pro. Then one day we started hearing rumors of some political unrest between the natives and the Peruvian government. Apparently, the government had given away land rights to oil companies, and the natives were protesting. It got out of hand. The natives decided to shut down all the roads and rivers from the interior to the coast. They essentially shut off the food supplies to the major cities. This meant that we were stuck. We had a small radio and we tied a wire to it and ran it up into a tree to get better reception. We heard that there was a standoff between natives and the police, and the natives killed several police. We decided we needed to get out before things got worse. So we had to get safe passage out, but it was going to be a miserable trip. I remember the chief telling me, "You can go, but you will have a very hard time getting out of the jungle. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like. Here, have a coconut." At this point, my dad had also developed a bad case of bronchitis. It was an issue with some medication he was taking, but we didn't know it at the time. Things were looking pretty sketchy, so we hopped on a boat that was heading upstream. It was full of chicken cages. I sat on top of chickens for about half a day. It stank so fucking bad I can't even describe it. We stopped at several settlements, and at each one we had to get safe passage to the next settlement. The natives were shooting arrows at boats coming by, so we needed a chaperone who was known in the vicinity. We eventually made it back to the road, and started a long trip back up to the mountains. The roads had been trashed by natives along the way. They cut down trees, threw boulders in the road, and sometimes just stood in the middle of the road. It took us about a week to get back. Somewhere along the way I got food poisoning. That was fun. Eventually we made it back to the capital, And some of the native leaders had made it out as well and held a round table with the Peruvian government. The government gave in and took the land rights away from the oil companies. The natives won that battle, and there was a huge celebration. I still have the newspaper when it was announced. My dad always told me, adventure is what happens when things don't go as planned. Well, that was an adventure, all right.